Before you begin making your bread, you must perform a few calculations. First, multiply the desired number of loaves by the weight of each loaf. This will give you the desired yield for your bake. It is a good idea to add 5% to the desired yield to account for any small pieces of dough lost. The second calculation necessary is for the water temperature. Water temperature is calculated by multiplying the desired dough temperature by the number of variables. The variables include flour temperature, air temperature, pre-ferment temperature, and friction factor. Desired dough temperature is typically between 75 and 78 degrees. This temperature window is the best to promote fermentation. Friction factor is the amount of heat created by the friction between the dough and the bowl during mixing. The method of mixing, short, intense, and improved, and the mixer itself will affect the friction factor. For our formula, we will multiply 78 degrees by 4 and then subtract each of the factors. Let's say that the flour temperature is 68 degrees, air temperature is 70, pre-ferment temperature is 40, and the friction factor is 26. This will give us a water temperature of 108 degrees. Once you have the desired water temperature, scale the water and make sure that it is correct. Scale all other ingredients. Typically, all dry ingredients can be scaled together, as well as all liquids. However, it is a good idea to double-check the formula and method of prep. For the Semolina sourdough, you can scale the bread flour, semolina flour, instant yeast, and salt together. Scale the levain and water into individual containers, as well as the butter. Make sure the butter is softened by the time you mix your dough. While most recipes used by home bakers are written using volumetric measurements, such as cups and teaspoons, this formula uses weight. Measuring by weight is standard for professional bakers, as it is more accurate and efficient than the alternative. Ingredients such as flour can vary greatly in volume depending on if they are sifted or packed down, so using weight is a more reliable method for measurement. Many bread doughs contain a pre-ferment, which is a mixture of a small portion of flour, water, and yeast that is allowed to ferment for 20 minutes to 18 hours before the final dough is mixed. Using a pre-ferment gives the final dough a more complex flavor, more strength, and an increased shelf life. For the Semolina sourdough, we are using a special pre-ferment called a levain. A levain is a pre-ferment made with wild yeast instead of commercial yeast. To obtain wild yeast, you must start and maintain a sourdough culture. More information regarding cultivating wild yeast can be found at the end of this video. Once you have properly scaled all ingredients, you can mix your dough. In commercial kitchens, spiral mixers are often used as they treat the dough gently and can mix large volumes at once. However, home bakers or smaller kitchens may use a stationary mixer fitted with a dough hook. There are 3 types of mixing methods concerning bread dough. The first is short mix, which is intended to replicate hand mixing. During short mix, the dough is only mixed on first speed, and normally for a short period of time. This produces a bread with a very open and creamy crumb, excellent flavor, and low volume. The second method is intensive mix. During intensive mix, the dough is mixed on first speed until all the dough is incorporated, and then on second speed for a very long time. This results in a tight white crumb, poor flavor, and high-low volume. It was used by bakers who were willing to sacrifice flavor and quality for shortened fermentation times. The third method, improved mix, is a compromise between short and intensive mix. With improved mix, the dough is mixed on first speed until all the flour is incorporated, and then mixed on second speed for a short period of time, just until a gluten window is formed. For the Semolina sourdough, we use an improved mix. After the dough is properly mixed, it is transferred in as few pieces as possible to a bin sprayed with water. Organize the dough by lifting one side and rolling the dough on top of itself. Then move it to the center of the bin. Check the temperature of the dough as soon as it is removed from the mixer. The dough should be between 75 and 78 degrees Fahrenheit. If it is too hot, make sure to put the dough in a cooler part of the bake shop. If the dough is too cold, place it closer to the oven or another warm area of the room. This step is called bulk fermentation. During fermentation, yeast converts simple sugars into alcohol, energy, organic acids, and CO2. Fermentation develops flavor, increases loaf size, and affects crumb structure. Fold the dough as demonstrated by Chef Lumi. For the Semolina sourdough, the dough is bulk fermented for 2 hours total and gets folded once after 1 hour of fermentation. There are 2 main reasons for folding. The first is to build strength, and the second is to degas the dough and get rid of large air pockets. In general, doughs that have more water in them get more folds in order to build their strength. After folding, be sure to check the temperature of the dough again and adjust the dough's environment if necessary. Once the dough is done fermenting, it is time to divide the dough. Check the wetness of the dough and flour the table accordingly. The wetter the dough, the more flour you will need on the table to ensure the dough doesn't stick. Flip the bin upside down onto the table in one swift motion to ensure that the dough doesn't fall on top of itself. Stretch the dough from the middle to the edge to achieve an even thickness and rectangular shape. Using a bench scraper, divide one strip of dough from the rest. Divide it to the desired weight in as few cuts as possible. For the Semolina sourdough, the desired loaf weight is 500 grams. After the dough is divided to the correct weight, you can pre-shape it. Be sure to clear the flour from the bench before pre-shaping, or else the dough will be unable to seal properly. Not all doughs are pre-shaped the same way. For the Semolina sourdough, it is pre-shaped into a boule or ball. To do this, flatten the dough and place any small pieces of dough in the center. Then fold the corners of the dough towards the center until a circular shape is formed. Flip the dough so the seams are on the table, and gently move the ball in a circular motion on the table. Place the pre-shaped dough seam side down on a floured wooden board. 6 to 8 boules will fit on a single board. As soon as a board is filled, it should be placed in a warm and humid environment. In the bake shop, rolling racks that are covered and sprayed with water are often used. As soon as the last board is placed on the rack, you can start timing the bench rest, which is typically 20 minutes. Bench rest is necessary because it gives the gluten the opportunity to relax before final shaping. Once the dough has rested, it is time to final shape the dough. Before you begin shaping, clean the bench of all flour. Once the bench is clean, take a piece of dough and place it seam side down on the bench. Then, gently press it and stretch it into a flat oval. Fold one long edge of the dough into the center of the oval, and press with the sides of your hands to seal it. Rotate the dough 180 degrees and repeat with the other side. Then, fold the dough in half, sealing it with the heel of your hand. With the seam up, gently roll the dough from the center towards the edges to lengthen it until it is approximately 2.5 feet long. Taper the ends of the dough and then roll it into spirals, each end going in the opposite direction. Place the shaped dough seam side down on a damp cloth and then onto a tray of sesame seeds. Place the dough on a board with a couche, seated side up. Place the boards back onto the covered rack and allow to proof for 1 hour. A good indicator that a dough is done proofing is if it springs back when pressed. This step is called final proof. The final step in the baking process is scoring and baking. While most doughs get scored or cut in specific spots to allow steam to escape and give the bread a distinctive look, this bread does not get scored. The reason we don't have to score this bread is because the seams are facing up, which will give steam a place to escape without making any cuts. We bake the Semolina sourdough in a deck oven at 450 degrees. Make sure to steam the bread once at the beginning of the bake. This will give the crust a nice crunch and shine. The bread bakes for at least 22 minutes until it is a deep golden brown. Before you begin cultivating a sourdough starter, it is good to have an understanding of the sourdough process. Sourdough bread is made using wild yeast that is found in the environment, instead of commercial yeast used in other breads. In order to use this wild yeast, you must provide the correct environment for it to grow. This environment includes food, in the form of simple sugars found in flour, water, oxygen, and warmth. The first step in perpetuating a culture is mixing together water and flour. To start the culture, mix together 1 part whole wheat flour, 1 part white flour, and 2 parts water. In baker's percentage, this is written as 50% whole wheat flour, 50% white flour, and 100% water. While there are sugars in the flour, you can add 0.015% diastic malt to the culture in order to give the yeast more food. During this step, you have not only provided the culture with food and water, but also oxygen, which has been incorporated during mixing. All that's left to do is provide warmth. Once the water and flour have been combined into a smooth paste, transfer it into a container at least triple the volume of the starter. Place the lid on the container and place it in a space that is around 80 degrees. It is also a wise idea to warm the water used for feeding to about 80 degrees. After you have placed the starter in a warm space, it will take 24 hours before the culture is ready to be fed again. When it is time to feed your starter, weigh 1 part warm water, 1 part bread flour, and 1 part starter into a bowl and mix with your hand until a smooth paste forms. Transfer the starter into a large container with a lid and place in a warm environment. Leave the starter for 6 to 8 hours or until the culture doubles in size. Feed the culture again, repeating the morning process, except use cooler water around 65 degrees. Leave the culture overnight. After 16 hours has passed, you may feed the culture again with warm water. Leave to ferment for 6 to 8 hours, and then feed again with cool water. Up until this point, your culture has not been stable enough to use for levain. However, after 3 days of feeding, you have a choice. In the morning, you can either feed the culture as usual, or you can remove some of the starter to use in a levain, and then feed the rest. After 6 to 8 hours of fermentation, you have another choice. You can use some of the starter for levain and feed the rest, feed the entire culture, or you can put the starter in refrigeration without feeding it. By putting the culture in refrigeration, you slow down fermentation enough to prevent overripe starter, but not enough to completely stop it. From day 4 onward, you have the same set of choices during the morning and afternoon feedings of your starter. When you choose to use, feed, or refrigerate your starter is up to you. As long as you understand and respect the needs of your sourdough culture, it can be pretty flexible. Just remember, you can only use a ripe sourdough starter in your levain. As a rule, you should use the starter in your levain right before you are supposed to feed the culture. The levain for the Semolina sourdough consists of bread flour, whole wheat flour, water, and starter. Simply mix the ingredients together until the mixture is smooth with no lumps, and allow to ferment for 20 minutes to 18 hours before the final dough is to be mixed.